Our special breaking news coverage continues. Joining us now is Matthew Dalek. He's a professor of political management at the George Washington University. Professor, thank you so much for jumping on with us today. You're an expert.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You're an expert on the National Guard's role in domestic affairs. How do you suspect something like what we saw play out today will impact that role?
Well, it's very hard to know. This is obviously a tragedy and really horrific. The Guard in D.C. apparently has come from many different states, not just West Virginia, but South Carolina, North Carolina. Some members patrolling here are from Washington, D.C. I read recently that in the past hour that the administration is going to send an additional 500 troops to Washington. It's unclear what the purpose of that would be for. It's very hard to know what the motivation is for this and whether it's going to lead to more troops in Washington and elsewhere or actually going to lead to a drawdown. And we're just going to have to see.
Yeah, Matthew, I know that that's an impact that we are going to wait and see. We did hear from the Pentagon that they're going to send 500 more right away. Could you see this shooting changing anything in terms of deployments in other cities, not just here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, look, the fear, which I guess has come to pass, is that you deploy troops against the wishes of people in the cities, the governors and mayors in states and cities, and it amps up the friction, right? It creates a greater degree of tension, and that the troops, the Guard, becomes, again, horrifically, but becomes a kind of target. And I don't know. My guess is that there is a very real chance that the administration will take this terrible event and put more troops in Washington, more troops in more cities, at least in the short term. And it's not even clear exactly what their purpose is or what greater deployments would do. But it certainly creates an opening for the administration if they decide they want to ramp up troop deployments, they want to crack down in some way. It certainly gives them a kind of justification for doing something like that.
Matthew, I'm wondering how much of a factor do you believe it is in determining a motive in this case? We don't have that just yet, in figuring out the next steps of the administration and whether they will have the public support for those next steps.
The extent that we can figure it out will be important. A lot of times in these targeted shootings, the shooter is mentally unwell, and it may be hard to kind of distill exactly their motives. But I think it will create a kind of narrative one way or the other. And to be honest, I think different sides, whether people support or oppose these National Guard deployments, different sides are going to use whatever information comes out to push their, to their advantage, right? They're going to push their narrative about whether this means that the Guard should not be here or whether there should be more Guard troops. So I guess my concern is that it's going to further fracture this already really difficult debate. And then the last thing I would say is that it's not clear how popular these National Guard deployments are. I haven't seen any recent polling, but I haven't seen a groundswell of support from the American people for the deployment of these Guard troops. And, in the cities where they are being deployed, I think that, most residents are opposed to having them there. So I assume this is going to remain a very controversial issue for the days and weeks ahead.
Let's look at this from maybe a 30,000-foot view here for a second, because you led right into that next question about the political climate. We're already seeing, and social media can, of course, be just a a bastion for this sort of thing, but we're already seeing a blame being assessed for how people either view the National Guard or how people view an order by the president, a directive that brought them here in the first place, and whether or not they've been vilified. And then, of course, political sides, the lines being drawn pretty distinctly. We are, by anyone who's been in Washington, D.C. a long time, at a pretty fragile state as far as the political division. What do you make of it, regardless of this shooting? Where are we right now when it comes to the temperature in D.C.?
Yeah, well, I think the temperature in the city itself, and I live here, I think it is more fraught, and it has been generally more fraught. I see reports, for example, of ICE raids and National Guard troops on my campus, on the George Washington University campus. I think that there's a fear, especially among more vulnerable populations in Washington. I think if we step back as well, it's important to note that if this indeed was a targeted shooting, if it was an act of politically motivated violence, I think it's another kind of terrible moment in just an ongoing series of moments, right? Another horrific act and a kind of cycle of political violence, if you will. And of course, violence, acts of political violence, tend to beget more violence, right? Whether that's violence coming from the state or violence coming from an individual against the state, other kinds of violence, right? This kind of bloodshed does not typically result in people coming together and saying, let's all get along. I think it inflames people further, radicalizes people.
Professor Matthew Dalek, thank you so much from George Washington University for joining us tonight to discuss this breaking story for us.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate your perspective.